What if I told you that one of history's most renowned explorers set sail chasing spices and gold, only to stumble upon an entire continent? What drove Christopher Columbus to defy the odds, despite being repeatedly dismissed as a madman? And why do we still grapple with whether he is a hero or a villain?
Friends, be sure to subscribe to my Quiet History channel, and leave a comment of at least 7 words. This is necessary for the channel to function. Share this video with others if you think it's important. Thank you.
It all began with a mistake. Christopher Columbus, a man who would come to change the world, firmly believed he was sailing in one direction, only to find himself in an entirely different place. His quest for spices, wealth, and glory led him to discover a land he had no inkling existed. His story is not merely one of the discovery of America. It is a tale woven from the threads of one man's stubbornness, the greed of monarchs, the fears of sailors, and the capricious winds that conspired to alter the fates of millions. In the late 15th century, Europe was suffocating under the weight of its own ambitions. The continent felt cramped for kings, merchants, and priests, each yearning for more. Gold, silk, and spices flooded in from the east, from India, China, and islands with names that sounded like enchantments. Words like cinnamon, clove, and nutmeg symbolized wealth, power, and the ability to dictate terms. However, the path to the east was tightly controlled by the Ottoman Empire and Arab merchants, who inflated prices to astronomical heights. Venetian and Genoese traders thrived on these markups. European monarchs, gritting their teeth, dreamed of finding their own direct route, one that was theirs alone, free from middlemen. In this world lived a boy named Christopher Columbus. Born in Genoa in the year 1451, he grew up in a bustling city of weavers, merchants, and adventurers. His father was a wool weaver, laboring with hands perpetually stained with dust and grease. The family was not impoverished, but neither did they bask in wealth. From an early age, Christopher heard the creaking of ropes, the cries of seagulls, and watched as ships departed for the Mediterranean Sea. He learned the craft of weaving, assisted his father, but his heart yearned for the water. By the age of 14, Columbus was already navigating the seas. Initially, he sailed close to shore, along the Italian coast, but soon ventured farther, to Corsica and Sardinia, and into the Aegean Sea. He learned to read the waves, the stars, and to feel the wind on his skin. And he was an avid reader. In the libraries of Genoese monasteries, he discovered ancient manuscripts, maps, and treatises by geographers of antiquity. Ptolemy asserted that the earth was round, while Aristotle wrote about the spherical nature of the world. Marco Polo described the riches of China and India with such vivid detail that anyone reading his accounts would be left drooling. Columbus absorbed these texts like a sponge, convinced that the world was far more expansive than it appeared, yet simultaneously smaller than what cautious scholars believed. If the earth was truly round, then sailing west could lead to the east. It was logical, beautiful, and undeniably dangerous. By 1476, Columbus found himself in Portugal, the realm of explorers. King John II sponsored voyages along the African coast, seeking a path to India that circumvented Africa. The Portuguese were obsessed with the sea. Columbus married a woman named Filipa Moniz, the daughter of a minor nobleman. This union granted him access to the maps and documents of her late father, a navigator in his own right. He studied the winds and currents. His idea of sailing west to reach Asia began to take root, evolving into an obsession. However, there was a critical flaw. Columbus was gravely mistaken in his calculations. He believed the circumference of the Earth was about 24,000 kilometers, when in reality it measured closer to 40,000. He incorrectly estimated that Asia lay only 5,000 kilometers to the west of Europe, relying on inaccurate assessments and overly optimistic conjectures. Professional geographers at the court of King John quickly identified his numerous mistakes. When Columbus proposed his plan to sail westward in 1484, he was politely, yet firmly, rejected. They deemed it too risky, too costly, and far too dubious. But Columbus was nothing if not persistent. Armed with the stubbornness akin to that of a mule, he refused to concede defeat. His journey took him to Spain, which had recently completed the Reconquista, reclaiming the last Moorish stronghold of Granada. King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile were basking in triumph, filled with energy and ambition. They desired glory, wealth, and the spread of Christianity. Yet even they hesitated. Columbus waited 6 long years. He lived in poverty, humbled himself before the court, and repeatedly outlined his vision. The Royal Commission turned down his plan not once, but twice. They branded it madness, a waste of resources. And yet, a miracle occurred. In early 1492, just as Columbus was preparing to abandon his quest and head to France, Queen Isabella changed her mind. Perhaps her advisors had persuaded her, or perhaps she glimpsed something extraordinary in this seemingly mad Genoese. Maybe she simply decided to take a risk. The cost was minimal compared to the potential reward. She agreed to finance the expedition. 3 ships, 90 men, a chance at fame. On the 3rd of August, 1492, the fleet set sail from the port of Palos de la Frontera. 3 vessels, the Santa Maria, the flagship, the largest ship on which Columbus himself sailed, the Pinta, commanded by Martin Alonso Pinzon, and the Niña, led by his brother Vicente Yáñez Pinzon. These ships were relatively small by modern standards. Santa Maria measured around 19 meters in length. The crews were a motley assortment of sailors, adventurers, and convicted criminals who were promised pardons for their involvement in this perilous venture. Few among them genuinely believed in success. Many feared they would sail to the edge of the world and plummet into oblivion. Nevertheless, they embarked with spirits intact. The first day at sea unfolded relatively peacefully as they sailed southwest toward the Canary Islands, where they replenished their supplies of food and water. On the 9th of September, they ventured into the open ocean, and that is where the true test began. Day after day, all they saw was water, blue, endless, and silent. The sky and ocean melded into one at the horizon. The wind was favorable, a double-edged sword that both relieved and terrified them. If the wind always blew westward, how would they return? The crew began to murmur, demanding to turn back. Columbus, ever the tactician, resorted to deception. He maintained 2 logs, one detailing the actual distance traveled, and another, which he showed to the crew, that understated the figures to quell their rising panic. Yet fear continued to mount. Weeks at sea became torturous. Fresh water spoiled, bread grew moldy, and illness claimed its toll on the men. No one knew how much longer they would sail. Columbus made promises. Just a little bit more, just a little bit longer. Land was close. He searched for signs of shore, birds, drifting seaweed, and the color of the water. On the 10th of October, the crew stood on the brink of mutiny. They openly threatened to throw the admiral overboard and turn back. Columbus bargained for 3 more days. If they did not see land in that time, he would concede. On the 11th of October, they began to notice signs. A branch with green leaves, a stick that had clearly been shaped by human hands, and various plants. That evening, Columbus swore he saw a fire flickering in the distance, though no one else could confirm it. The night was fraught with tension and anticipation, anxiety crackling in the air. And at 2 o'clock, what happens when an ambitious explorer like Christopher Columbus sets sail with dreams of wealth and glory, only to find chaos and despair waiting for him instead? How did the man who stumbled upon a new world end up in chains, and what catastrophic consequences followed in the wake of his discovery? Join me on this journey through history as we unravel the remarkable yet tragic tale of Columbus and the New World. In the early hours of October 12th, Rodrigo de Triana, a sailor aboard the ship Pinta, shouted out in excitement, "Land! Land!" In the moonlight, a new world began to take shape before their eyes. This was the moment when the island of Hispaniola came into view. But what lay ahead was not just a new territory. It was the beginning of unprecedented upheaval. Columbus, the man hailed as a great navigator, was proving to be an inadequate administrator. He possessed the ability to sail and dream with relentless determination, yet he struggled to manage people, resolve conflicts, and establish a sustainable society. Tensions ran high among the colonists, leading to quarrels and accusations against Columbus for his greed and incompetence. Food shortages plagued the settlement, and gold was not found in the promised locations. In a desperate attempt to gain favor and resources, Columbus dispatched ships back to Spain filled with enslaved indigenous people, hoping to secure some form of profit. Yet, Queen Isabella was displeased. Her vision was to convert the heathens, not to exploit them as commodities. In 1498, Columbus embarked on his third expedition, this time with 6 ships and 300 men. Setting his sights further south, he discovered the coastline of South America, specifically the mouth of the Orinoco River. The sight of vast amounts of fresh water flowing into the ocean led him to believe he had found a new continent rather than an island. However, he stubbornly continued to refer to this land as part of Asia, clinging to the hope that the fabled riches of China and India were just beyond the horizon. Upon returning to Hispaniola, Columbus faced a disastrous situation. The colonists were in open rebellion. The island teetered on the brink of civil war. In response, the Spanish crown dispatched Francisco de Bobadilla, a commissioner tasked with restoring order. Upon his arrival, Bobadilla assessed the chaos, listened to the complaints of the colonists, and promptly arrested Columbus and his brothers. They were sent back to Spain in chains, marking a profound fall from grace for the man who had opened the New World. Although the crown eventually released him and returned some privileges, he was stripped of the title of viceroy forever. Unyielding in his ambition, Columbus insisted on yet another expedition, determined to prove that he could find a westward route to the Indian Ocean. By the time the fourth expedition set sail in 1502, Columbus was over 50 years old, facing declining health with ailments such as arthritis and fever. Nevertheless, he pressed on with 4 small ships and 140 men, including his 13-year-old son, Fernando. Columbus explored the coasts of Central America, covering territories that would become modern-day Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama, all the while searching for a passage to the Indian Ocean. Sadly, he found nothing but disappointment. The local indigenous people spoke of a vast sea on the other side of the isthmus, the Pacific Ocean, but Columbus could not grasp the significance of their words. As his ships deteriorated and his crew succumbed to illness, they became stranded on Jamaica, waiting nearly a year for rescue. When they were finally located and brought back to Spain, Columbus was a broken man. On May 20th, 1506, Christopher Columbus passed away in Valladolid, Spain. He died believing that he had discovered a new route to Asia, unaware that he had actually encountered 2 immense continents unknown to Europeans. His legacy was fading, overshadowed by the exploits of other explorers who followed in his wake. Amerigo Vespucci, a Florentine navigator, analyzed the coastline of South America and famously proclaimed that it was not Asia, but a new world. In 1507, cartographer Martin Waldseemüller named these newly discovered lands America in honor of Vespucci, leaving Columbus's name unassociated with the continents he had discovered. Nonetheless, the process Columbus had initiated was irreversible. This transformation became known as the Columbian Exchange, a complex and sometimes devastating interchange of goods, organisms, and ideas that began after 1492. From Europe to America came horses, cows, pigs, wheat, sugarcane, and diseases such as smallpox, measles, and typhus. Conversely, America gifted Europe with potatoes, corn, tomatoes, tobacco, and even syphilis. These exchanges radically reshaped the world. Potatoes and corn played a pivotal role in saving Europe from famine in subsequent centuries, allowing populations to grow exponentially. Meanwhile, sugarcane transformed the Caribbean into massive plantations powered by the forced labor of African slaves, who were tragically transported across the Atlantic in appalling conditions. The influx of silver and gold from American mines inundated Europe, triggering inflation and simultaneously enriching and impoverishing Spain. Easy access to wealth corrupted the economy. Spanish monarchs squandered riches on wars rather than infrastructure development. By the end of the 16th century, despite the immense flow of precious metals, Spain found itself deep in debt. For the indigenous peoples of the Americas, the repercussions were catastrophic. In 1492, tens of millions inhabited the regions that are now the United States, Mexico, Central America, and South America. Estimates of their numbers vary widely, ranging from 30 to 100 million. Yet, within 150 years of Columbus's arrival, their population plummeted by an astonishing 90%. This was one of the worst demographic collapses in human history. Diseases ravaged entire communities in mere weeks. Smallpox decimated populations, while measles and typhus finished what they had begun. Warfare, enslavement, and forced labor exacerbated the situation. The Aztec Empire in Mexico, with its magnificent capital of Tenochtitlan, larger than any European city of the time, fell to the small band of conquistadors led by Hernán Cortés in 1521. This defeat was not due to superior military strength, but was largely attributed to smallpox wiping out half of Tenochtitlan's population, including its emperor. Similarly, the Inca Empire in Peru, which stretched thousands of kilometers along the Andes, collapsed under Francisco Pizarro's assault in 1532, aided by disease and internal strife. The Spanish, Portuguese, and later the English, French, and Dutch rushed to the New World, establishing colonies, missions, mines, and plantations. They sought to convert indigenous peoples to Christianity, using both the sword and the sermon. Franciscan and Dominican monks ventured into the jungles, founding missions and teaching natives to pray and labor in European ways. Some of these monks, like Bartolomé de las Casas, were horrified by the brutality of colonizers and became advocates for indigenous rights, appealing to the crown for laws to protect the native population. Yet, the majority of Europeans viewed indigenous peoples as either potential converts, a cheap labor force, or obstacles to be removed. The silver mines of Potosi in modern Bolivia became a grim emblem of this era. Discovered in 1545, they became one of the world's largest sources of silver. Thousands of indigenous laborers perished under coercive work conditions imposed by the mita system, a mandatory labor draft. They labored in horrific settings at elevations exceeding 4,000 meters, enduring cold, darkness, and the inhalation of toxic mercury vapors used in the silver extraction process. Many died. Silver poured into Spain, enriching the crown, funding wars in Europe, and purchasing luxury goods from the East. At its zenith, Potosi was larger than London, a city built on the bones of the oppressed. The Atlantic slave trade emerged as yet another grim legacy of Columbus. As it became evident that indigenous peoples were dying en masse and becoming increasingly scarce, the demand for labor shifted towards Africa, leading to the horrific displacement of millions. The cycle of exploitation and devastation continued, forever altering the course of history in both the Old and New worlds. What does it really mean to discover a land already inhabited by millions? Can we judge Christopher Columbus and his ambitions by today's standards? Were his journeys a gateway to progress or a harbinger of suffering? These questions linger as we navigate through the turbulent waters of history, and they force us to confront the duality of a figure celebrated as a hero by some and vilified as a villain by others. In the wake of growing plantations of sugar, tobacco, and cotton, European powers turned their gaze toward Africa. The Portuguese were the first to transport enslaved Africans to the Americas in the early 16th century, setting in motion a horrifying industry by the 17th century. Ships from England, France, the Netherlands, and Portugal sailed repeatedly between Africa and the New World, facilitating a trade that would devastate lives and cultures on both sides of the Atlantic. Meanwhile, Spain, despite the immense wealth flowing from its colonies, found itself teetering on the brink of decline by the end of the 16th century. King Philip II squandered vast sums on endless wars against the Ottoman Empire, the Protestant Netherlands, and England. The Spanish Armada, dispatched against England in 1588, was decisively defeated, marking a symbolic end to Spain's maritime dominance. The country's economy suffered from inefficiencies. Instead of investing in industry or agriculture, funds were funneled into conflict and the importation of foreign goods. The Spanish crown declared bankruptcy several times as gold and silver drained away to enrich the bankers of Genoa, Amsterdam, and London. The English colonies in North America developed quite differently than their southern counterparts. In the early 17th century, Puritans seeking religious freedom founded settlements in New England, notably Plymouth in Massachusetts Bay. These colonies were not primarily established for wealth, but for the creation of a new society grounded in their religious beliefs. However, they too encountered the native populations, leading to inevitable conflicts. Diseases had already ravaged the Indian tribes of New England before the colonists arrived, with epidemics between 1616 and 1618 decimating up to 90% of certain tribes. Surviving Native Americans attempted to coexist with the newcomers, occasionally assisting them by teaching agricultural practices like corn cultivation and hunting techniques. Yet, as colonial settlements expanded, indigenous lands were seized and tensions escalated. This culminated in brutal conflicts. The war, known as King Philip's War, from 1675 to 1676, devastated New England, claiming thousands of lives on both sides. By the end of the 18th century, the British North American colonies had flourished, gained strength, and begun to pursue independence. The American Revolution of 1776 was a direct consequence of the processes initiated by Columbus's voyages. 13 colonies declared their independence, establishing a new nation founded on the Enlightenment ideals of freedom and equality. Yet, this notion of equality initially excluded slaves and Native Americans. The United States Constitution was adopted in 1787, but slavery remained legal for nearly another century. Native Americans were systematically pushed westward, their treaties violated, and lands confiscated. This policy culminated in the 19th century with the Trail of Tears, during which thousands of Cherokee Indians were forcibly relocated from the southeast to the west, leading to untold suffering and loss of life. In Latin America, the early 19th century heralded a wave of revolutions. Figures like Simón Bolívar, José de San Martín, and Miguel Hidalgo emerged as symbols of the struggle for independence from Spanish and Portuguese rule. By the 1830s, most Latin American countries had achieved independence, yet the legacy of colonialism weighed heavily upon them. Their economies remained reliant on the export of raw materials, societies were divided along racial and class lines, and political instability became the norm, with caudillos, military dictators, rising and falling, promising order but delivering cycles of violence and corruption. Columbus himself died unaware of the enormity of his discoveries. He never grasped that he had not reached Asia, but had instead encountered entirely new continents. His reputation has oscillated over centuries. In the 19th century, particularly in the United States, he was exalted as a hero, an intrepid explorer, and a symbol of progress and courage. Cities, rivers, and universities were named in his honor: Columbia, British Columbia, the District of Columbia. His name became etched in the annals of history, with statues erected and holidays established, including Columbus Day, which became an official holiday in the U.S. However, the 21st century has seen a shift in this perception. Voices have emerged that highlight the darker aspects of his legacy: the genocide of indigenous peoples, the transatlantic slave trade, the violence, and the destruction of cultures. These issues have sparked heated debates, leading to the removal of Columbus statues and the renaming of holidays to Indigenous Peoples' Day. He has become emblematic of contradictions, both a brave explorer and a ruthless colonizer, a hero to some and a villain to others. Historians continue to argue over his motivations, character, and legacy. Was he driven by a thirst for fame and fortune, or a genuine desire to spread Christianity? Was he a brilliant navigator, or merely a stubborn fanatic who happened to be lucky? The answers often depend on the lens through which we view him. What is undeniable, however, is that he changed the world. His voyages connected two hemispheres that had evolved separately for millennia. This connection was violent and bloody, yet it was also irreversible. The globalization we witness today traces its roots back to that pivotal moment in 1492. The intertwining of economies, global trade networks, human migration, cultural exchanges, and ideas all stem from the age of exploration initiated by Columbus. Without him, the world we know would likely be vastly different. Perhaps someone else would have discovered America in time, as the Vikings had already visited around the 11th century, establishing a settlement in Vinland but failing to secure their hold. Likewise, Admiral Zheng He's Chinese fleets had sailed the Indian Ocean in the 15th century, reaching as far as Africa but never crossing the Pacific. If Columbus hadn't taken that monumental step, it is plausible that the Portuguese, the English, or another power might have made their mark in the following decades. Nevertheless, it was Columbus who set this process in motion. His journeys ignited a series of events that shaped our modern world. Today, we inhabit a globe molded by the consequences of his travels. Languages, religions, political boundaries, economic systems, and even our diets reflect the exchanges that took place in the aftermath of his voyages. Tomatoes in Italian cuisine, potatoes in Irish dishes, corn in African staples, and chili peppers in Indian cooking all trace their origins to the Americas. Conversely, horses on the Great Plains, the hat industry in Argentina, and sugarcane in Cuba were imported from Europe and Africa. The world has become interconnected and interdependent, but this connection came at a horrific cost. Millions perished from diseases, warfare, and enslavement. Entire civilizations vanished, and cultures were obliterated or radically transformed. The environmental impact was staggering, as forests were cleared for plantations, animal species were driven to extinction, and landscapes were irrevocably altered. European animals and plants displaced local species, leading to ecological upheaval. Modern ecological science is only beginning to grasp the full scale of these changes. The history of Columbus compels us to confront uncomfortable questions. What does it truly mean to discover land that is already alive with its own histories and peoples? How do we evaluate historical figures whose actions bear such contradictory consequences? Can we apply contemporary moral standards to past actions? Should we even attempt to do so? These inquiries lack straightforward answers. Some argue that Columbus was a man of his time, and to judge him by 21st century ethics is inherently unjust. In the 15th century, the enslavement of the conquered, land seizures, and the forced conversion of beliefs were common practices, not unique to European powers. The empires of the Aztecs and Incas were also predicated on conquest and subjugation. Yet others contend that even within his own era, the brutality exhibited by Columbus and his contemporaries was inexcusable. As we reflect on this contentious legacy, we are reminded that history is often a complex tapestry of intertwined destinies, marked by both triumphs and tragedies. Columbus's journeys did not merely open a new chapter in the story of exploration. They unleashed a torrent of consequences that continue to reverberate through time, shaping the world we inhabit today. What if I told you that Christopher Columbus, a man who is often hailed as a hero for discovering America, was also a figure entwined in cruelty and exploitation? What if his journey, meant to bring glory and trade, ultimately unleashed a tide of oppression? How could a man so ambitious for fame and fortune end his life forgotten, clutching onto an illusion that he had reached Asia? These questions surround the legacy of Columbus and his contemporaries, like Bartolomé de las Casas, Antonio de Montesinos, and Francisco de Vitoria, who in the 16th century bravely condemned the brutalities inflicted upon indigenous peoples. They shouted that the indigenous inhabitants were indeed human, deserving of rights, and that the sins of slavery and genocide were unconscionable. So, while the knowledge of this evil existed, Columbus and his peers made a deliberate choice. They opted for violence, greed, and exploitation. Columbus is an intricate figure, much like the history of the indigenous peoples of the United States and Canada. Despite centuries of oppression, these communities have fiercely retained their identities, fought for their rights, and revived their languages and traditions. The narrative did not end in 1492 when Columbus landed on the shores of the New World. It has continued to evolve. Columbus may have opened America to Europe, but can we also say he opened Europe to America? This interaction irrevocably changed both sides. Europeans were introduced to new lands, expanded their horizons, and confronted profound questions that would transform their philosophies, sciences, and religions. Conversely, America received new technologies, animals, plants, and ideas, but at an unimaginable cost. Could the brutality of colonization have been avoided? In theory, yes. Imagine if the Europeans had arrived not as conquerors but as partners in trade, respecting local cultures instead of imposing their religion through coercion and enslaving the people. Such a scenario would have required a profound shift in worldview, a different set of values. However, during the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, the prevailing logic was one of power, expansion, and competition. States that failed to expand risked becoming weak and were often consumed by their neighbors. For many empires, brutality and oppression were integral to their functioning. Some individuals attempted to forge an alternative path. The Jesuit reductions in Paraguay during the 17th and 18th centuries aimed to create societies where indigenous peoples could live under the protection of missionaries, convert to Christianity voluntarily, and maintain their cultural heritage while working collectively. These experiments enjoyed limited success, but were ultimately crushed by colonial authorities who disapproved of their independence and the control they exerted over local resources. Columbus, deeply ambitious, did not dwell on the long-term consequences of his actions. His focus was on personal glory, wealth, and proving his own worth. He aspired to be an admiral, a viceroy, and to etch his name into history. And he did achieve notoriety, but not in the way he envisioned. His name became a symbol not only of exploration, but also of a complex, often brutal, and transformative era. The twilight of his life was marked by sadness. Ill and stripped of the honors he craved, forgotten by his contemporaries, he died clinging to the fantasy that he had reached Asia. Even in death, Columbus could not find peace. His remains were moved multiple times, first from Spain to Hispaniola, then to Cuba, and back again to Spain. After his passing, the location of his true burial site became a matter of heated debate, leading to DNA tests to ascertain the whereabouts of his bones. This is, in itself, symbolic. A man who reshaped the world's geography found himself lost between continents. His sons struggled to maintain the privileges bestowed upon their father by the crown, engaging in protracted legal battles, compromises, and the gradual loss of titles. By the end of the 16th century, Columbus's descendants had become affluent nobility, but they were no longer the powerful rulers their father might have envisioned. We remember Columbus not for his administrative skills, humane treatment of others, or precise calculations, but rather for his stubbornness and daring spirit that drove him into the unknown. Against all odds, he sailed to uncharted waters and returned, forever altering the world. His story is one of ambition and consequence, dreams and disasters, discovery and destruction. It is a tale filled with complexity, nuance, and pain. It does not offer simple lessons or fit neatly into categories of heroes and villains. Instead, it compels us to reflect on what it means to be human in history, simultaneously a creator and a destroyer, a dreamer and a harbinger of death. Every time we cross an ocean on a plane in a matter of hours, we are utilizing the technologies and knowledge linked to those first explorers. Every interaction with the lingering effects of global inequality, the legacy of colonialism, and racial conflicts forces us to confront shadows cast by those historical events. Why do we continue to narrate this story as if it belongs to a distant past, as though it is completed? It is very much alive, unfolding within each of us, in the world we inhabit, and in the choices we make. Christopher Columbus set out to find India, but stumbled upon America instead. He sought gold and uncovered continents. He craved glory, yet gained disputes that have lasted for centuries. His ships traversed the ocean and connected worlds, but this connection was also a rupture, a clash that heralded a new order built on the ruins of the old. The 12th of October in 1492, the day Rodrigo de Triana called out, "Land!" was not the end of a journey, it was merely the beginning, a beginning of an era that is far from over. The indigenous peoples of the Americas, despite enduring centuries of oppression, have clung to their identities, fought for their rights, and revived their languages and traditions. The story continues, evolving and reshaping itself, reminding us that history is not a closed chapter, but an ongoing narrative that we all partake in. What if Christopher Columbus had been a benevolent ruler instead of a relentless seeker of glory? Would history remember him as a visionary leader, or simply as a figure of ambition and consequence? How do we reconcile the legacy of a man who dared to navigate uncharted waters and, in doing so, altered the course of human history? These questions linger, drawing us into the complex narrative surrounding Columbus, a tale that reveals the intricate dance of creation and destruction that defines the human experience. Christopher Columbus is often celebrated, but not for the qualities one might expect of a great leader. He was not primarily known for his administrative prowess, his compassion, or his precision in planning. Instead, we remember him for his unyielding determination and audacity, the sheer courage to confront the unknown. Columbus ventured into territories that had eluded even the most seasoned sailors of his time. His journey was not just a feat of navigation, it was a monumental act that forever changed the world. The saga of Columbus is one steeped in ambition, laced with the consequences of his actions. It is a story of dreams pursued fervently, but also of calamities born from those very aspirations. His explorations opened new frontiers, yet they also unleashed a wave of destruction across indigenous cultures and ecosystems. This duality makes his legacy remarkably intricate, neither entirely heroic nor wholly villainous. Columbus's narrative challenges us to contemplate the essence of humanity in the grand tapestry of history. It compels us to recognize that any individual can be both a creator and a destroyer. His life illustrates the profound complexities of ambition, a force that can propel us to incredible heights, yet also lead us to grave consequences. As we reflect on his journey, we are urged to ponder our own roles in the ongoing story of humanity. Are we, too, capable of shaping history in ways that are both beneficial and catastrophic? In the end, Columbus's story is not just about exploration. It is a profound meditation on the human condition, revealing the struggles and triumphs that accompany our quest for greatness. The legacy he left behind challenges us to think critically about the impact of our choices. As we navigate the waters of our own lives, let us remember that history is not simply written by victors. It is shaped by the complex interplay of ambition, consequence, and the enduring quest for understanding.